It started with a weekend that was supposed to be ordinary. Martin had his business trip to Chicago. Another conference, another hotel, another dinner with a client I'd never meet. We'd been married for 24 years, long enough that his absences didn't stir anything in me except the pleasure of silence in the house. I'd grown to appreciate that quiet space he left behind like an aftertaste, neutral, dependable, predictable, just like him. The house still smelled of lemon polish from the cleaner, who came on Fridays. The tulips I bought for myself were starting to bow their heads in the vase by the window. Outside, the lawn was too green, too trimmed, a little too much like our lives. It had all become a kind of suburban wallpaper, pleasant, color-matched, and entirely devoid of surprise. Until Joel showed up. He was my stepbrother, though we'd never lived together as kids. My mother married his father when I was already 25, already married to Martin, already keeping my hair short and practical. Joel was a few years younger than me, 37 when we reconnected. We hadn't spoken in more than a decade. I hadn't even known he was back in town until he called, his voice low and smooth like a jazz station in the middle of the night. I remembered that voice vaguely from a few family holidays and that one awkward wedding where we'd danced once, too closely for step-siblings. I was tipsy. He wasn't. But nothing came of it. Until now. "I'm in town for a couple weeks," he said. Figured I'd say hi to the only stepsister I've got. I offered polite curiosity. Asked the usual questions. Work, life, love. He'd just gotten out of a relationship. Messy, nothing special, he said with a kind of amused detachment that made me picture dim bedrooms and tangled sheets. I told him Martin was away for the weekend, and that he could come by if he wanted. He arrived with a bottle of wine, barefoot in worn leather sandals, a white button-down open at the neck. His hair had grown longer than I remembered, and his beard was trimmed, but careless in that intentional way men wear it when they know they're good-looking. He smelled like cedarwood and something faintly smoky, like campfire or the kind of cologne that costs more than it should. We sat on the deck. Talked. He poured the wine. I laughed too loud. He watched me. "You always been this beautiful?" he asked casually, as if commenting on the weather. I felt something flicker in me then, something old and inconvenient, a heat I hadn't felt in years, not since I'd stopped worrying about whether Martin found me attractive, not since I'd accepted that passion was for the young or the foolish. But Joel looked at me like I was neither. I told myself it was harmless. A little flirtation. A little ego boost. He was family, sort of. He was just visiting. But when I stood up to take the glasses inside and brushed past him, his hand slipped lightly against the small of my back. It stayed there for half a second too long. That half second changed everything. He came back the next day. I didn't ask him to. He just showed up again around 5, like it was normal, like we planned it. I'd spent the entire afternoon pacing the kitchen, cleaning things that didn't need to be cleaned, putting on and taking off 3 different blouses before settling on something casual, but not too casual. The kind of casual you wear when you want to look like you didn't try at all. This time, he brought Thai food. He knew I liked it. I didn't remember ever telling him. We ate on the sofa, with the TV playing something forgettable in the background. The food was spicy, the wine a little stronger than last night's. Our legs brushed now and then, and neither of us moved. He told me about the places he'd been, the women he'd dated, the ones who were too young, too dramatic, too needy. He said it like he was confessing, like he wanted me to know something more than what his words were saying. Then, after a long pause, he turned to me. "I keep wondering," he said, eyes locked on mine, "what it would have been like if we'd met as strangers." I didn't know what to say to that, because I'd wondered too, even back then. He leaned in slowly, deliberately. His hand came up to my jaw, warm and steady. I should have stopped him. I didn't. When his lips touched mine, I didn't hesitate. I opened to him like a secret, like I'd been waiting for it. It wasn't a kiss of greeting or of family. It was a kiss that asked a question and offered a promise in return. My hands moved into his hair. His pressed to my waist, then slid under the hem of my blouse. We didn't speak. The only sound was my breath catching when he lifted me slightly and eased me back into the cushions. "I shouldn't be doing this," I whispered against his mouth. "You're not doing anything," he murmured, mouth grazing my neck. "Let me." And I let him. His touch was slow, exploratory, reverent. As if I were something precious, rediscovered after being forgotten too long. Every inch of skin he touched felt lit from beneath. When he undressed me, he did it with a patience I hadn't known I'd craved. No fumbling, no rush, just deliberate worship. I remember the way he looked at me when I lay back on the couch, completely bare. Like he was seeing something holy. Like I was the answer to a question he'd never dared ask. We made love like two people who knew it was a mistake, but didn't care. I cried out his name once, not loudly, but loud enough. He kissed the sound right out of my mouth. Afterwards, we lay tangled and breathless, the room full of the scent of sex and lemongrass and guilt. "I'm not sorry," he said, tracing a line down my arm. I wasn't sure if I was. I told myself it would be just this once. That it was heat and nostalgia and wine. That we would laugh about it in the morning, chalk it up to something strange and beautiful that happened in the quiet space between two lives. But he stayed the night. And the next morning, when I woke up with the sheets twisted around my thigh and his hand resting possessively on my hip, I knew it wasn't just once. It was the beginning. The morning light was soft, diffuse, and far too honest. I lay still for a moment, trying to remember what my body used to feel like before last night. It had been years since I'd woken up next to someone who made me feel alive. Not just warm or safe or familiar, but electric. Joel shifted behind me, breath brushing the back of my neck like punctuation. His arm tightened around my waist in sleep. For a second, I didn't want to move. But then I remembered the silence in the house. Martin's absence. The calendar on the fridge with his return flight circled in blue ink. The tulips on the table, fading, sagging just slightly. I pulled the sheet up to my chest as if modesty still had a role to play in this house. "You're thinking too hard," Joel mumbled behind me, still half asleep. He pressed a kiss to my shoulder. "Stay." "I have errands," I said, the lie bitter on my tongue. "Then I'll go," he said, sitting up, bare and utterly unashamed. He stretched, and for a moment, I hated how young he looked. Not young in years, but in possibility. His skin held none of the fatigue mine had gathered. My stretch marks, my soft stomach, my breasts that no longer sat quite where they once did, I felt every inch of age on me in the bright morning light. But when he looked back at me, none of that was in his eyes. "You're beautiful," he said, as if he could hear my thoughts. "You don't even know, do you?" I said nothing. Joel dressed in silence, his fingers quick and practiced. At the door, he paused and looked back. "I'll text you," he said. "Unless you don't want me to." I should have said don't. But I just nodded, and then he was gone. The house was different after that. Quieter, but not peaceful. There was a charge in the air, like the place itself remembered. The scent of him lingered in the hallway, subtle but insistent. Skin, sweat, and that smoky cologne that clung to everything it touched. I changed the sheets. I vacuumed. I made coffee and didn't drink it. His message came just after noon. "Lunch? Or are you hiding from me?" I stared at the screen for a full minute before replying. "I'm not hiding. Just thinking." Dangerous habit. Thinking. Then. "But if you change your mind, I'll be at the garden room at 1. You know the place." I knew it. An old greenhouse turned cafe, all sunlight and soft jazz. It was Martin's least favorite place. Too twee, he'd say. I loved it. At 12:45, I was standing in front of my closet again, trying to remember what women wore when they wanted to be noticed. I picked a sundress I hadn't worn in years. Pale blue with a neckline just low enough to make me nervous. I brushed my hair, put on mascara, and told myself it was only lunch. Joel was already seated when I arrived, sunglasses pushed back on his head, a glass of iced tea sweating in front of him. He stood when he saw me, pulling out a chair like he'd been raised by someone far more gallant than his father. "You came," he said, a smile ghosting across his lips. "I shouldn't have," I replied. "Probably not." We ate slowly, talked about nothing. His knee brushed mine beneath the table, and I didn't move it. His voice had that lazy drawl that made everything sound like a dare. I found myself laughing too easily, leaning in, smiling with my whole face. He walked me to my car afterward. "I could kiss you right here," he said, "but I won't." "Why not?" "Because I want you to ask me to." I didn't. But I didn't drive away right away either. I watched him walk back to his car, my heart thudding with a rhythm I hadn't felt in years. That night, I lay in bed beside Martin's empty pillow and thought about what Joel's hands had felt like, what his mouth had done to me. I touched myself in the dark, quietly, remembering his voice in my ear, the way he said my name when he came. I didn't feel guilty. That's what startled me most. There was no crushing remorse, no weepy confusion. Just a calm, quiet knowing something had shifted in me. When Martin came home 2 days later, he kissed my cheek and set down his suitcase in the same place he always did. I watched him unpack, fold his shirts, plug in his phone. I watched him like I was studying a man I no longer knew. Or maybe one I knew too well. He asked about the house, the dog, the neighbor's kid who mowed the lawn. He didn't notice the new sheets. Didn't smell the different perfume I'd started wearing. He didn't ask if I'd missed him. I smiled, cooked him dinner, listened to his conference stories. And then, when we went to bed, I let him have me. I lay beneath him, eyes open, hands obedient. It wasn't bad. It was fine. That was the problem. Afterward, in the dark, I said I was tired and rolled away. I texted Joel the next day. "That thing we did. I can't stop thinking about it." "Me neither," he replied. And then, "Want to make it worse?" We met at a boutique hotel by the lake. He'd already checked in. Room 307. I wore sunglasses and a scarf and felt ridiculous, like some amateur actress in a mid-century affair movie. But when I opened the door and saw him standing there, shirt already unbuttoned, eyes dark with want, I forgot everything else. He didn't speak, just pulled me in and closed the door. We didn't waste time. I dropped my purse. He lifted my dress. I was already wet. He cursed softly when he felt it, mouth at my throat, hands everywhere. We made love on the small love seat first, clothes half on, half off. Then again on the bed, slower this time. He knew my body better already than Martin had ever bothered to learn. Afterward, he lay on his back, breathing hard, one arm draped over his eyes. "I keep telling myself this is a bad idea," he said. "It is," I agreed. "And yet," he said, glancing at me, "I can't stop wanting you." I said nothing. He turned toward me then, propped on one elbow. "What do you want, really?" No one had asked me that in years. Not with any real interest. Not with their hand resting on my stomach like a promise. "I don't know," I whispered. "But this feels like the first thing I've wanted in a long time." Joel leaned down, kissed the space between my breasts. "Then maybe we shouldn't stop," he murmured. "Not yet." So we didn't. It became our ritual. Once a week, sometimes twice. Hotels, quiet lunch spots, his rental house when his roommate was out. We became experts in timing, in discretion, in locking eyes across crowded spaces, like we were in on a secret no one else would ever understand. I lied to Martin with a fluency that surprised me. Book club, Pilates, errands. I told myself I was still a good wife. The house was clean. The meals were cooked. I still smiled at his jokes, still made sure he had clean shirts and coffee in the morning. I kissed him goodbye like nothing was wrong. But something had awakened in me that would not go back to sleep. And deep down, I think I knew it wasn't just about Joel. It was about me. The woman I'd forgotten I was. The woman I hadn't been since before the kids, before the mortgage, before I started calling desire a phase and routine a comfort. Joel didn't just give me sex. He gave me back to myself. It's a strange thing, loving two men at once. One with your history, the other with your hunger. I tried not to call it love, at least not with Joel. Lust was easier. Lust didn't ask questions at night when you lay next to your husband, breathing in rhythm like two strangers who learned to mimic a dance long after the music stopped. But it wasn't just lust anymore. It hadn't been for weeks. It wasn't just the sex, though God, the sex was spectacular. Urgent, inventive, sometimes rough, sometimes reverent. He touched me like he'd invented my body, like he knew every button and exactly when to press it. He'd whisper things I couldn't say out loud, even to myself, then make me say them with his mouth on my throat, his hand at the back of my neck. It was the way he looked at me when I talked about things that had nothing to do with us: books, music, the way the sun hit the tiles in the hallway at exactly 4:30 in the afternoon. He listened. Fully. Completely. Like I was art in motion, and he didn't want to miss a second of it. Martin had stopped looking at me like that years ago. Maybe I'd stopped being someone worth looking at. But with Joel, I was rediscovered. Not reinvented. Just remembered. He started cooking for me. Real meals, not just takeout. I'd show up to his rental, and there'd be candles, wine, jazz on the speaker. He'd pull me into the kitchen mid-stir and press me against the fridge, whisper something filthy, then go back to slicing peppers like it was the most normal thing in the world. We made love in the shower once, water pouring between our bodies, steam curling around us like breath. He kissed me like he couldn't get enough of me, like every inch of skin had to be learned again and again. After, he wrapped me in a towel and dried my hair with his hands. "I want to take you somewhere," he said one night, fingers tracing lazy circles over my thigh. "Just us. A weekend. Somewhere no one knows us." "That's dangerous," I whispered. "That's the point," he replied, smiling against my shoulder. And so we did. I told Martin I was going to a wellness retreat with the girls. A digital detox. A weekend of yoga and silence and self-care. What I got instead was a tiny cottage on the coast, overlooking gray waves and wild grasses, the kind of place where everything smelled like salt and cedar and sex. Joel brought coffee in bed. I wore nothing but his shirt for 2 days. We walked barefoot on the shore, hands brushing, hearts beating too loud. I laughed like I hadn't in years. Loud, unfiltered, head tilted back toward the sky. At night, he built a fire. We drank wine by it, curled together under a shared blanket. At one point, I turned to him and asked, half drunk and half terrified, "What are we doing?" He didn't flinch. "We're being alive," he said. For once. I should have known then that the weekend would leave a mark. Because when I came home, everything looked wrong. Martin was waiting at the door, his hands in his pockets, the way he stood when he was trying not to seem anxious. He hugged me a little too tightly, like he'd expected something worse than yoga and granola bars. I let him. I told him it had been wonderful, restorative. And it had been. But not in the way he thought. That night, in the shower, I found a faint bruise on the inside of my thigh, Joel's mark, his mouth's memory. I stared at it for a long time, fingers hovering, heart racing. He was in me, under my skin, and I didn't want him out. Joel started sending me photos. Not explicit, not always. Sometimes just a cup of coffee in his hand, a half-read book, his bed with one side turned down. But the message was always clear. "This is waiting for you." And I kept coming back. He took me in ways I hadn't known I wanted, bent over a windowsill, blindfolded in a hotel room, slowly and silently on his knees in the back seat of his car as rain beat against the roof. He taught me my own body again, reintroduced me to parts of myself I'd forgotten, desires I'd buried under routines and grocery lists and PDA meetings. But it wasn't just physical anymore. Not even close. One afternoon, lying in his bed with sunlight slicing across my bare hip, Joel reached over and touched my cheek like he was memorizing it. "I think I'm falling for you," he said. The words landed softly. Too softly. "I don't know what to say," I whispered. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I didn't say it because I wanted you to say it back. I just wanted you to know." But I saw it then, that flicker of something dangerous. Vulnerability. Hope. Maybe even expectation. The rules were changing. We tried to pretend they weren't. We still met in secret, still devoured each other like we had no past, no future, only the hunger of the moment. But it was different now. Every kiss felt heavier. Every goodbye lingered longer. Every stolen hour felt like both a gift and a ticking clock. Martin started noticing things. He'd ask where I'd been, why I was smiling, Why I'd suddenly started buying lace underwear again after a decade of beige cotton and practicality. He wasn't suspicious, not yet. Just curious. But I could feel it, the weight of the lie getting harder to carry. And Joel felt it too. One night, after I left his place, he sent me a single line. "I don't want to be your secret forever." I stared at it for a long time. What was I doing? What did I think this would lead to? I told myself I was still in control, that I could end it whenever I wanted, that I was just taking something for myself finally, that I deserved it. But the truth was simpler. I didn't want to let him go. Not because I needed him, but because with him, I remembered who I used to be, before the compromise, before the predictability, before I made peace with being half asleep. With Joel, I was awake. And waking up, it turns out, is a dangerous thing. The affair changed seasons before I even noticed. Summer slipped into fall. Our stolen hours got colder, darker. We wrapped ourselves in coats and false promises. Joel stopped saying he loved me out loud, but it was there, in the way he looked at me, touched me, waited for me. I stopped telling myself this was temporary, because the truth is, I didn't want it to be. Martin and I started going to bed at different times. At first, it was practical. He stayed up to read. I went early to rest. But it became a quiet arrangement, a way to avoid the intimacy we both knew had worn too thin to hide behind. He still kissed me goodnight, out of habit, not desire. One evening, we went to a dinner party at a colleague's house. One of those stiff affairs where the women gather in one room with wine and compliments, and the men cluster near the grill like generals planning war. I wore a dark green dress that clung in all the right places. Joel had seen it once on a hanger and said, "You should wear that sometime when you want to ruin me." I wore it that night for the thrill of knowing he would never see it. But something strange happened. As Martin introduced me around, laughed at someone's joke, I looked at him. Really looked. And I saw what I'd forgotten. Not his flaws, not the dullness. But the man who once drove 6 hours to surprise me with takeout from my favorite restaurant when we were dating. The man who held my hand while I gave birth. Who sat beside me after my father died and didn't say a word because he knew there was nothing to say. Martin had been good. Mostly. He had loved me, in his way. But I had changed. And I had never told him. On the way home, he glanced at me across the console and said, "You've been different lately." My chest tightened. Different how? Lighter, he said after a pause. Like, you've come back from something. I turned my face toward the window so he wouldn't see the tears rising. Because he was right. I had come back from a long, dark silence I didn't even know I'd been living in. But I hadn't come back to him. And I never really would. That night, I lay awake while Martin snored softly beside me. I picked up my phone, opened Joel's messages, and stared at the blinking cursor. He had texted me earlier. "I miss you. More than usual today." I typed. "I think I have to tell him." And hit send. He replied almost instantly. "Are you sure?"
No. But you want to?
"I want to stop lying. I want to stop splitting myself in half. I want you whole, too." The next day, I didn't tell Martin. Nor the next. But the truth started building behind my ribs like a storm. And the guilt. It wasn't just guilt about the affair. It was guilt for all the years I'd lived with the lights off in my own house. For playing a part so long I had forgotten it wasn't me. Joel was right. I couldn't live in the middle forever. So I made a decision. I invited Martin to dinner. Just the two of us. No work, no neighbors, no background noise. I made his favorite dish. Set the table with candles. I wore the soft sweater he always said made me look calm. We sat across from each other like two people on opposite shores. "Something's wrong," he said halfway through the first course. Not as a question. I nodded. "There's something I need to tell you." He waited.
No panic. No pleading.
"I've been seeing someone," I said. There it was.
Just like that.
His fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Slowly, he set it down. "How long?" he asked quietly. I hesitated. "Months." He looked down at his plate, then around the room, like he suddenly couldn't remember where he was. "I see," he said. And I wanted to scream, to cry, to collapse into him and beg forgiveness. But I didn't. I sat still, hands in my lap. I didn't do this to hurt you, I said. He laughed, bitter. Then why did you do it? I could have said, because I was lonely. Because I forgot I was still a woman. Because I didn't know how to ask for what I needed anymore. But none of it would have made it better. So I said, simply, because I needed to feel alive again.
He didn't speak.
Just nodded slowly, eyes on the candles. Eventually he stood, walked out of the room. I heard the quiet thud of the bedroom door closing. I sat at the table for a long time after that. Then I picked up my phone. I told him.
Joel called me.
His voice was gentle, careful. How do you feel? Like I took off a mask I've been wearing for 20 years, I said.
I'm terrified.
But you're free.
Was I?
In the weeks that followed, Martin and I tried to talk. Some nights he slept on the couch.
Some nights I did.
We went to counseling once. It was awful. The therapist asked me what I wanted from my marriage, and for the first time I said, I don't know anymore. Joel never pressured me. He didn't ask me to move in or run away. He just waited.
Gave me space.
Kept seeing me when I needed to be seen. And then one afternoon, as we walked together through the park, him in jeans and me in an old coat, holding coffees like nothing had changed, I looked over at him and felt it. Not just desire. Not just infatuation.
Love.
The real kind. The messy, inconvenient kind. I don't know where this ends, I told him. I don't have a plan. He smiled. I'm not asking for a plan. What are you asking for then? He reached for my hand. Just today. And maybe tomorrow. And so I gave him today. And the next. Eventually, I told my kids. Grown now, out of the house, they took it better than I expected. They asked questions. Some hard, some kind. I answered as honestly as I could. Martin and I separated. Quietly.
No fights.
Just the painful, adult acknowledgement that something we'd built together no longer fit. He cried once in the kitchen. I held his hand. We were still us, in some strange way. Just different now. Joel never asked me to choose. But in the end, I did. Not between two men. Between the woman I had been and the one I had finally become. And she, the new one, was wide awake. She walked without apology. She loved with both hands. She kissed like a woman who had once forgotten herself. And finally remembered.